G'day folks. So this presentation focuses upon the Native American culture, analysing traditional means of environmental management over a span of 10,000 years or more. During this period, Native Americans were sustained by hunting, fishing, gathering, lithic quarrying and trading. So historically, North America was inhabited by Native American tribes, combined of different cultures and diverse adaptations to land use and resource management. Native American societies recognise territorial boundaries and community ownership of land, coupled with individual responsibility for resource conservation. The ability of Native Americans to meet their economic needs was sustained not only through hunting and gathering, but also through a variety of horticultural techniques, including burning, irrigation, selective harvesting, sowing, and weeding. The exploitation of vegetative or asexual reproduction of plant species was extremely important to Native American existence. The practice of selective harvesting ensured culturally significant plant communities were not overexploited and promoted genetic diversity. Diversity of food resources was obtained by following an annual cycle of population movements that coincided with seasonal availability of specific resources. Fire was the most important management tool, employed to clear brush, maintain grasslands and meadows, modify understory composition in forests and reduce wildfire fuel accumulation. Burning also increased the availability of surface water and increased the flow of springs by reducing water appropriation of less culturally preferred species. Native American relationships to the land were highly interactive. Seasonal manipulation augmented wild populations and created differing mosaics of vegetation types. This interaction embodied a transfer of energy and matter from one element to another, causing a change in all elements combined. Tribal members would often express the plants want to be used, and plants flourish when people care and respect for them. In this sense, the inability of tribal members to harvest species may have a negative effect on plant communities that respond positively to human management for biological and/or spiritual reasons. Native Americans assert wildlife was gifted by the Creator, along with caretaking responsibility. This obligation is mechanical and metaphysical in nature, ensuring the health of wildlife communities dictates holistic management practice and demonstration of respect. Failure to perform these duties threatens the well-being of both land and people. Land management activities were also guided by complex cultural rules, sophisticated knowledge of reproductive biology, and awareness of community ecology. By managing the plants in a culturally appropriate manner demonstrates a respect for them, which is reciprocated by plants returning more abundantly in the future. Native American management practices were diverse, yet unified by a fundamental land use ethic to interact with nature respectfully, allowing life forms to coexist. It comprised spiritual, philosophical, and economic dimensions that encourage sustained relationships between humans and environments over millennia. This ethic transcended cultural and political boundaries. Native Americans modified environmental conditions, dispersed plant species to new areas, and created recent evolutionary modifications in the flora through human selection for particular traits. Thus, Native Americans were instigators of ecosystemic change with varying degrees of intensity. Rather than reflecting an unchanging system, these landscapes were much more dynamic under the influence of human disturbance than in their natural state. The creation of specialized habitats intensified plant, animal, and human relationships, creating a highly interactive system that ultimately changed vegetation patterns over time. Many of the habitats today preserved and managed as natural landscapes within national parks are in fact the product of long-term cultural intervention. Without the continuation of traditional management, there has been a measurable decrease in biodiversity, deterioration of plant health, and obstruction of scenic vistas. Historically, the establishment of national parks was rooted in 19th century conceptions of wilderness. Wilderness, as depicted by 19th century environmentalists, was derived from European Romanticism. This philosophy conveyed a nostalgic yearning for a nature untouched and unspoiled by human influence. Interestingly, contemporary Native Americans often use the word wilderness as a negative label for the land that has not been taken care of by humans for a long time. A common sentiment among Native Americans is that a hands-off approach to nature has promoted feral landscapes that are inhospitable to life. Native Americans believe that when humans are gone from an area long enough, they lose the practical knowledge about correct interaction, and the plants and animals retreat spiritually from the earth or hide from humans. When intimate interaction ceases, the continuity of knowledge passed down through generations is broken and the land becomes wilderness. For Native Americans, cultural and biological diversity are intimately linked. Religion is also closely related to attitudes towards biodiversity. Attitudes toward biodiversity are value-loaded perspectives on behaviour with regard to biodiversity. Valuations of biodiversity are embedded in these attitudes, which connect values to action. If the goal of public land managing agencies is to preserve certain ecosystems in some semblance of their pre-contact structures and functions, they can no longer ignore indigenous anthropogenic effects and must investigate the possibility of simulating some of the earlier cultural practices. However, there remains an invisibility of indigenous peoples' values and knowledge in the dominant paradigms of resource management. If ecologists could understand the intricacies of how and why native people shaped ecosystems, it would enrich their inventory of management methods. In order to achieve well-being for humans and non-humans, stronger sustainable development commentators assert that there is a need to change the demands made on Earth. The common strategy advocated is a more small-scale, decentralized way of life based upon greater self-reliance, creating a social and economic system less destructive towards nature.